David Sierra, CJF, Las Vegas, Nevada.
You know, the very essence of the mental game is this. The only reason an event matters is because we make it matter.
Welcome to the Mullins Farrier podcast.
I had a soccer coach, and he always said, we are going to be the fittest team always out there. Because in the moment, you don't want to be worried about being tired. You want to be focused on the soccer game.
Right.
Which is what's going to translate for me, hopefully, in the CJF, is that I'm not worried about being tired. I can focus on the task at hand.
And granted, he was like, get your specimens made. 3 months before you take your exam, get all your AW specimens made. And it's good to have other people putting that pressure on you as well. Sometimes if it's a single journey, and you've not got mentors that are coaching you, helping you, you kind of rest a little bit.
If you're hearing this, you are currently on the non-subscriber feed. If you would like to hear this episode in its entirety, please subscribe using the link below. If you're a student, apprentice, or just find yourself in a situation where it isn't financially feasible to subscribe, please reach out to me on Facebook or through the website. The good folks at Out West Design and Fabrication are lending their support by helping us to cover your scholarship subscription. You can check out many of their incredible projects on their Facebook page. Out West Design and Fabrication, your choice for Farrier rakes. Now here's a sample of this week's episode. Thank you for listening.
Most people that I know in this industry only want the best for the other people in the industry, which is a pretty cool thing.
Welcome, everyone. Well, I'm about at the midpoint of my English Farrier tour. Had a great time at Focus and the International. Got a lot of fantastic interviews done, so stay tuned for those. And as it goes at that type of event, I had a lot of fun and interesting conversations with fellow farriers, both on and off the mic. My esteemed tour guide, Danny Bennett, took me with him to Hereford College, and I got to spend some time with the students in the forge and the classroom. It's hard not to be envious of the facility and the program that they get to attend there. As an added bonus, the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Edward, was visiting the college at the same time, and I got to meet and converse with him on his tour of the forge. Doesn't get more British than that. For those who haven't heard Danny's episode with me on the Lockdown Farriery podcast, I'm sticking around England for a little longer to attempt the associate exam of the Worshipful Company of Farriers. I've been prepping for it for a few years now. This year, I've been focusing a lot of effort on it, with multiple trips down to the Heartland to get lots of help from Chris and Cody, and then attending a Jonathan Nunn clinic down there as well. I was also fortunate enough to get Danny to fly over to Canada for some of his tutelage as well. I can't emphasize enough how much going through the process of pursuing certification and higher level exams has done for me. It's the challenge, the learning, the progress, and it's the people. I have had so many people offer me help, insights, and tools in big ways and small. The Farrier family is a real thing, and they go out of their way to help you out when you show some effort and keenness to learn. So thank you to everyone who has helped me out on this journey. There are way too many of you to name, but all of your help has been appreciated. All of this is a great segue into my conversation with today's guest, an examiner for the AFA. David and I met on Vern Powell's Puerto Vallarta trip, where many of the farriers down there in Mexico were taking their AFA exams. Ask anyone about David Sierra in the farrier world, and they all have nothing but kind words and praise. After finally getting to meet him myself, I understand why. I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. And we're all the way down here in Mexico. What brought you down here?
Well, the certification probably, and Vern had asked if I would come down. I believe Mike Poe couldn't make it. He was the original. Yes, they had me on injured reserve, so I came came down. Gladly did it. It's been a fun time.
Yeah, it has, hasn't it? You're very involved in certification with the AFA. What got you into that in the first place?
Well, probably just originally going through the process. I would say I got my start in New Mexico from where I'm from, but I remember my good friend Mike Stone first, and I was not doing much, but I remember him going through the process and being nervous and so forth. And then kind of looking at it as I got into shoeing a little bit more, I kept thinking, man, I don't know if I can do that. And so I got with the right people to get to study and to work and to get me pointed in the right direction. From that point on, going through just the process itself is what led me to become, I think, very involved, because I did see the importance of it. And being around where I shoe in Las Vegas, there are not very many either members, or there weren't, especially when I first got started. There was one guy by the name of Bill Murphy who had left. He went up to UC Davis, I think. So there wasn't any CFs or CJFs. And I think it was one of those where once I started going through the process, I found out how important, because it moved me further ahead faster than I believe if I wouldn't have gone through the process, for sure. Of course, going through it, making it through my CF, and then I dove right into my CJF after. And again, I had a lot of good help and I guess advisement. Once I finally made it through that, I think there was a lot of things that I felt that I learned, because sometimes I don't think I'm quite the sharpest tool in the shed. So it takes me a little bit longer to, in some aspects, right? I think that I had some strengths, but I also had some weaknesses. So I wanted to take the area where I was weak and help out those others with some of my trying to treat some of that stuff like as if I was a second grader. So if I could help them out in the very simple way that I was helped out, and how I helped myself out, I guess, is what in some areas, right? Because you can get the direction, but you don't always have somebody there holding your hand. So you have to go through, or when you're at home, especially for your journeyman, practicing certain aspects on your own. I found what worked for me. Once I became a tester, I was able to see, at least try to help. And I think most newly CJF candidates want to be a tester to try to help out, because again, I think there's that, man, I made it through. I can't believe I made it through. So if I can help somebody else or give them some pointers, I think that's where it all started. So being in Las Vegas, we would do maybe 1 to 2 certifications a year. So typically you don't get a lot of tester time, but we are close enough to the Arizona group and the California group. And so I would use those opportunities to go outside of my area and help out where I could, because usually they would need, especially Arizona didn't have as many testers, just like we don't have that many. So we would go back and forth and help each other. And this was back before I became an examiner. I just used that. And I think that's where I would get some of that more experience than just doing the one test a year. In 2016, I was asked by the committee if I would be interested in being an examiner. I had been asked before, but I just didn't feel I was ready. It was one of those things I was like, I can't be the decision maker for somebody who's going to pass. It was just, one of those, I just didn't. And so finally in 2016, I said, I'll go ahead. And so then I, of course, went through the process of becoming an examiner.
And what is that process from tester to examiner?
I'll say we, because obviously I'm being part of on that now, is we look for the testers who seem to be involved and are good with the candidates and help them along, especially at the end when they don't pass. That's usually, because the ones that don't pass learn more than if they barely made it by their chinny chin chin, So when we see a lot of these testers that help jump in, help out, organize, do things like that, that's where when we go back and have our meetings, say, hey, have you guys noticed this person? Or if we need an examiner in an area, this person's really involved and does this, and again, they can deny it if they want. They don't have to do it. But then that's a process. And just like being a tester, when somebody is recommended and then gets on the provisional list, they've got to do a minimum of 3 tests. Same with the examiners as well. So that's kind of the process, and again, everybody has to vote on it, right? Because somebody can make a recommendation for a tester or an examiner. And if the rest of the committee doesn't approve it, then
that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Okay. You had a former apprentice or student here, somebody who hung out with you for a bit, Felipe.
Yeah.
I'll get you to tell the story of how he got to work with you, but he was here doing his bar shoe for his exam and is written today, right?
And is written.
Okay. For his CJF. And what was that like, just to see somebody that wasn't ready when you first knew him get to this level?
to see somebody grow is phenomenal when you see them listen and struggle as well, right? So I met him in 2016. He actually had met Chris Gregory down in Bogota at a clinic.
Okay.
He wanted to learn the forging aspect of farriery. He drove to Bogota, saw that clinic, talked to Chris, and of course, Chris was like, yeah, anytime, come on up for one of his classes. He did, and he had a 6-month travel visa or whatever he had to come on up. So he spent some time, well, of course, at the time I didn't know, but he has family in Las Vegas. So he went there first, and then he made it to Chris's class for the blacksmithing and learned a little bit. And then I got a call from Chris and said, hey, we got a student here from Colombia. He's got family in Vegas. He's going to go back to Vegas for a little bit. If you just want somebody, take him around, show him a little bit, show him what you do. Then he has to go home. And I said, oh, perfect, I'll do that. So we finally made contact. He had called, or I think he didn't speak any English. So his cousin had called me. Then when I got back, he said, well, when he gets back from New York, he went to New York to visit some family. He has some family up there. And then when he came back, he called me and I said, yeah, if you want to come and hang out for a day or two, be at my house at X time. And he showed up, and, I thought I knew enough Spanish. And at the time I did not to communicate. We were able to communicate enough, right? Because his English at the time was almost non-existent. And I would say probably was non-existent. He hung out with me for a couple of days, and then he said, hey, can I come back? Because then we would get in the shop and do some stuff. And I said, yeah. So from that moment, he just stayed with me and seeing everything we do. If I went to go do a clinic or went to a clinic, I would take him with or even send him. And as it turned out, he started to meet other people from Chris's. And so he would go spend a couple weeks just to see what they do. It was kind of like an exchange, really, is all it was.
Yeah, just a self-directed one.
Then we became really good friends, and it turned out he didn't have to leave till March. So I said, if you want this opportunity, I can show you what I do, introduce you to people and so forth, and then get in the shop, which he did. Then when he had to go back home, he came back up for one of the conventions because I took him to the 2017 convention, and then he came up again for a month, and we went to the Reno convention.
Okay.
Which that was 2018, I think. Then he went back, and every opportunity he's come back, he's wanted to work on a certification. So I pretty much gave him a lot of homework and put him in the shop and showed him how to do shoe display and what he needed, showed him the book. At the time, we didn't have the translation for the certification guide, right? So, but his English was getting better, and some of the Spanish he taught me was getting better. So we were able to definitely communicate well about horseshoeing. So a lot of words outside of that, I was being raised in New Mexico. I knew some Spanish, but not enough to really hold a very good conversation. But when it came to horseshoeing, I was able to, because that's what we talked about every day. And I would learn words in Spanish. I would teach him in English. And we got to a point where I would try to speak only Spanish around about horseshoeing, and he would work on his English days, because I would go out and work, and he'd, of course, be at the shop, and he would just practice and practice and practice. And he was one of those guys that he had his mindset to it, and he did it. And his shoe display, get home, and I would look at his shoe display, and again, whatever I show him the book, how it needed to be. And if there was something need to be corrected, he would do it. Well, he ended up getting it done in 2019. He went to New Mexico and passed all of it.
Oh, wow.
So, and he studied. I had bought him at one point. I think Chris was given the clinic, but I purchased him the Spanish edition of the Gregory book that had just come out. I saved it for him because I knew he was going to be probably coming back in at some point. So I gave him that, and he studied out of that. And so then when it came to taking the test, he did pretty well, even though the old test was not translated as well, but he was able to make it through. So got that. And then of course his shoe display did very well. Then his practical, he did really well. And that year he ended up with the highest score. So it was really nice. Yeah. And I was there at that test course, but Vince Vesley, who is another examiner, of course, took over everything that he was doing. So it was really nice because I dealt with the others candidates, and Vince took the other half of the candidates, but he did really well. So it was good. It just because he listened. And I think that it's tough dealing with young men. As we know, we tend to be hard-headed and want to do things, but because I think being from a different country And having that opportunity to at least be here and learn, he really opened up his mind. And so he's done well. And today he passed his bar shoe, and
Very cool.
good to see that.
Do you always have an apprentice with you?
I always do. Yeah, I've had for many years. And now it's funny, I've heard it said on your podcast from several that, working alone really just isn't, and horseshoeing really wasn't developed to be doing it by yourself. And I agree, because I've had help or apprentices for many years, for a good chunk of my time, but I prefer it. It's safer. But again, if I can pass something along, of course, and then as I get somebody who's new and interested, I can let my current apprentice teach them so that they become the teacher and realize that they probably know more than they
think they do.
Thought. Yeah. So that works out. I always have an apprentice, and I've had some really good ones. Of course, you always get the ones that just you're not really sure what's going to happen, but I've had some good ones, including my son. They ventured off and done other things, but as far as getting as deep into it as I pretty much was during the time, they did. I had several apprentices that really, and especially earlier on, I was competing, so they would go to competitions with me. But yeah, I pretty much always carry help.
Okay. Now, you said that you, like me, got into this later in life. But how did that happen? It sounds like it was a bit of a transition. If you would like to hear this episode in its entirety, please subscribe using the link in the show notes. Thank you for listening.